We're going to ask, what's the difference between action research and good teaching? So what's the difference between action research and good teaching? And we've got Professor Emerita Jean McNiff with us today, who's going to take the first 15 minutes, and Claire Ashworth from Macclesfield College, who's the quality lead there. Claire, are you the teaching and learning or the quality lead? Forgive me if I've got your title wrong.
I'm head of curriculum here for Maths, English, Foundation Learning and Community.
I most certainly should have let you introduce yourself. And you'll hear from Claire a little bit later on. And let me remind you again, what we're looking to understand through the next part of the session is what's the difference between action research and good teaching. Now, Jean, I've got your slides ready to go, but before I put them on the screen, I'm going to pass over to you, put the spotlight on you so people can see you, and then you just guide me as to when you want me to show each slide. Over to you.
Thank you, Claire. Thanks very much for organising this and making it such a great session. Right, let's go with the slides, please, because the topic here, the focus, go back, please. The focus is to look carefully at what's the difference between action research and good teaching. Right. And next slide, please. So we're asking for 2 volunteers who are going to read the text on that you see on the screen. So you don't have to say anything original, it's just reading the text. So could 2 people from the group volunteer, please, to be person 1, person 2?
Okay, so this is where I'm just going to quickly take you off spotlight, Jean, and we've got Jane. Thank you. You were right in the corner of my screen. So Jane Brown from Lincoln College is our first volunteer. And then do I have any other hands raised on the screen now? Can you use reactions? Oh, Jolene, is that you clapping or volunteering?
I'll volunteer as well. It wasn't that, but I'll be a volunteer too.
Oh, Lynn, thank you so much for offering. I think we've got our 2 volunteers already. So Jane.
Wonderful, wonderful. So our first volunteer is on the script that you'll see on the screen in a minute, person 1, and the second one is person 2. So let's go back to the screen then, please, Claire. Thank you. So the invitation is just to read the conversation that you see on the screen. So off you go.
What do you do for a living?
I'm a teacher.
That sounds interesting. What does that involve?
Several things. First, you need to know your subject matter in depth. Second, you need to know how to teach. Third, you need to know whether you're helping other people to learn, i.e. evaluating what you are doing, keeping the bits that work and abandoning those that don't.
Sounds tricky. How do you check whether you are succeeding?
You research what you're doing, i.e. you research your practice. This means first having the knowledge, skills, wisdom and general capacities that make a good teacher. These are mainly practical issues of pedagogy, which you will learn in college and refine through the experience of classrooms. Second, it means knowing what research is and how to do it. This takes the form of a systematic inquiry, asking questions on a systematic basis and exploring possible answers.
Lawrence
Stenhouse said that research is systematic inquiry made public. You can find this on the internet here and here.
Wow, that sounds a lot. A real full-time job.
Yes, but that's not all. As a teacher, you need to appreciate that you are constantly evaluating what you are doing as you do it. In the literatures, this tends to be called researching your practice.
Research sounds difficult, quite specialised.
Well, to a certain extent, it is in some areas, But it also helps to keep in mind that research means generally finding out those things you need to know but don't already know, which we all do much of the time. For a teacher like me, that means observing what you are doing, identifying those bits you feel really show what you are doing, gathering data, keeping records of your actions and thinking as they develop, recording, and identifying and selecting those bits that really seem to work, generating evidence, refining those aspects whilst rejecting the stuff that doesn't work, evaluating, and systematically doing these things as a matter of course.
Are you saying that there's no difference between action research and teaching?
Yes, there is, notionally, on paper, but in practice, good teaching is in itself a form of research. You observe, gather data to show what you are doing, make decisions about what you're doing and whether you can do it better, trying out new ways and move forward again. It's a constant process of evaluating and improving. That's what Lawrence Stenhouse meant when he spoke about teaching as a form of research and research as a systematic process of inquiry. You should try it and see if you like it.
Sounds good, maybe I will.
And think of the contribution that you'll be making to other people's lives and to your own and to the planet. Teaching might be tough, but it's a great way to spend a working life. Teaching is a noble profession and teachers are fine people. You should feel really proud of yourself as a teacher. I'd say go for it.
Now, Claire, I'm going to ask you, please, can we go back to the slides that you've just shown and go back to the beginning of the conversation, because there was a lot in there. So let's work your way back in the slides to the beginning of the conversation. And I just want to pull out a couple of things that are in the conversation.
So well, hats off to you, Jane and Jolene. Thank you for your speaking and your volunteering. It's coming up now, Jean.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed. Thanks very much indeed, colleagues. That's really appreciated. Right, so is that the first one that we've got? Conversation between two newly introduced people. Let's move to the next slide, please. And being a teacher, you need to know your subject matter, you need to know how to teach, you need to know whether you're helping other people to learn and evaluating as you go, keeping the bits that work, abandoning those that don't. Move on. Next slide, please. Look at this. You're researching what you're doing all the time. You need to have knowledge, skills, wisdoms, general capacities that make a good teacher. Practical issues of pedagogy, which you learn in college and refine through experience. You also need to know what research is, how to do it. And Lawrence Stenhouse talked about research is systematic inquiry made public, and you can see that on the internet. Next slide, please. Teaching is tough. As a teacher, you need to appreciate that you're constantly evaluating. And this is called researching a practice. Next slide, please. Research sounds difficult, quite specialized, but it is important to remember that research means finding out those things you need to know, but you don't already know. Finding out those things you need to know, but don't already know. That means process of research, which involves observing, identifying those bits that really show you what you're doing, which is called gathering data or data, keeping records of your actions and thinking as they develop, identifying, selecting those bits that really seem to work, that is generating evidence, and refining those aspects while rejecting the stuff that doesn't work. And that's the process of evaluating and systematically doing these things as a matter of course. That sounds easy to say. It's really hard to do. Next slide, please. So notionally, there is a difference between action research and teaching, but in practice, good teaching itself becomes a form of research. That is, you observe, you gather data to show what you're doing, you make decisions about what you're doing, whether you can do it better, try out new ways, and move on. And Lawrence Stenhouse talked about this as a form of research, systematic process of inquiry. And that's what we all do as we teach. Are there any questions about that at the moment, please? Any questions, any comments, please, from colleagues about that? Because it's such an important point, this. Now, I'm not speaking from the screen, from notes or anything. It's just such a very important point that we're all teachers, and we know we're good teachers. If we weren't confident that we were doing a good job, we shouldn't be doing the job. We're all good teachers, and we get that kind of feedback from our colleagues all the time. And the people that we're supposedly teaching, we get that feedback from them. But the question is, how can we be confident that that really is the case? And people are not just saying things to be nice, which sometimes happens. And the way to do it, of course, is systematically to monitor our practice, which is research, and to be very clear and able to articulate the fact that we are doing research and we're not just doing good practice. Research becomes good practice, and good practice becomes a form of research. It's not difficult to give a description of what we're doing. I did this, I did that. But when we're asked to give an explanation for what we're doing, that's when it becomes a bit more difficult. Because descriptions respond to the question, what did you do? When did you do it? And so on and so forth. But an explanation responds to the question, why did you do it? What were your reasons? What did you hope to achieve? Did you think of the possible consequences of what you would do? And that's a big one, because it means it's all very well to talk about action. What might be the consequences of the action? We hope that through our teaching, people are going to learn. That's what teaching is all about. It's helping people to learn. And it's very difficult because during this session, during our entire experience of this seminar, we've seen that sometimes we get consequences that we don't entirely anticipate. And that's when it becomes very tricky. It becomes an ethical issue, because then how do we hold ourselves accountable, responsible for what we've done? So teaching is not just doing good practice, although it includes that. It's got to include that. But it becomes a kind of moral endeavor, because we have to think of the way in which we are influencing people's thinking and therefore influencing their actions. And that is a huge moral responsibility. And that's why when people say, teachers just teach, they do an awful lot more than just teach. Now I'm just going to stop there and invite any questions or comments on what I've said. I know we're doing that on chat, and I'm not reading that at the moment. I'm thinking about this. Are there any comments that anyone would like to say, to make on what I've just been saying?
I have been reading chat, Jean. So if you don't mind, I'll read a couple of things that are in there. But please, if you've written it yourself, say, "Hey Claire, I'm happy to speak for myself," and you jump in. There's a point from Sharon that came out of the breakout rooms that I think is really important here. There are some things that are out of our control. Staffing can be out of our control. Sometimes the assessments we're working towards, very often the assessment criteria we work towards are out of our control. What do we do, Jean, when there are factors that we would like to change, but we feel that we can't?
Do you want me to answer that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's a hard one to answer, isn't it? But what would your response be to that?
I think there are so many things that we can't not do anything about. You can't change the institution, you can't change the management, you can't change the curriculum. You're stuck with it. You do the best that you can. What you can do is be in control of your attitude towards these things. Life is full of frustrations. We have choices about how we deal with those frustrations and the consequences that might arise. We can get angry, we can go and beat the carpets or something. We get furious at things that are so frustrating. You can't change the government, you can't change policies. What you can change is how you react to it and the actions that you take in your piece of the world. You can't change the big world, but you can change your piece of the world. And if you look at the whole process of change, changes, unless you have big seismic shifts, which we do, but everyday change is what we as individuals do in our houses, in our back gardens. I'm very interested in environmental issues. I can't change policies. What I can do is change what I do in my garden. And I think if everybody collectively were to have a commitment on personal change, the world would be a different place. Have confidence in what you can do in your piece of the planet. And that's a great way in to helping the planet to survive.
Hear, hear.
Is that okay?
Yeah, powerful and important, Jean, and a beautiful answer to the question. I think it would be helpful now to hear from Claire and hear about how Claire and her team and colleagues at Macclesfield College tried to change their garden and their small piece of the world. This is a project that took place last year, but I invite you to continue to post questions for Jean and for all of us in chat as you listen to Claire, because it's going to all come into your head at unexpected times. And also we'll continue these discussions in the breakout rooms. So can I introduce Claire Ashworth, the head of Maths, English and Teaching and Learning at Macclesfield College. I've done it again, haven't I, Claire? I think it was closer this time.
Definitely getting nearer, yeah.
Nearer. Jean, can I thank you very much for giving us so much to think about? And I think as Claire builds on the ideas that you are sharing, we'll start to have some really interesting discussions in the next breakout. So yes, from me too, Caroline. Well, thank you, Jean. Claire, I'm going to spotlight you and I have your slides. So just tell me when to go and I'm ready to go.
Fabulous. If we have the first slide, thank you, Claire. So I'm going to start by giving a little bit of an overview of our project. If we move on to the next one, Claire. So the title was Investigating Strategies to Help Learners Solve Functional Skills Maths Questions. Next slide, please. So being completely honest, why did I apply for Action Research? I was attracted to the money, that just says it all about me, really. I was curious about what Action Research was. We had a problem and we were looking to solve that problem. And I think I probably needed a bit of a fresh challenge at the time. So our issue was that the functional skills level 1 maths pass rate was very low. It was in line with national, but that still isn't a very good percentage. So I wanted to do something about it. And I saw the action research and I thought, I think we'll give that a go. Next slide, please. So that's just basically the process that we used. And there's been a little bit of corruption on the slide there. Sorry, we've got a bit of a problem there on that step 3. But I think if you have a read of that, you can see the sort of things that we did during our action research. Lots of questionnaires to the learners, a real collaborative approach there with the learners, lots of testing, practicing, refining strategies, responding to their voice, analysis, more questionnaires. So that was the kind of process that we went through with the learners. Okay, next slide, please. So I think my mentor is actually here listening to this. So she will concur that I started with a very narrow-minded scientific approach, really. I'd got lots of preconceived ideas as to what the problem was, and I wanted to prove these problems. And I was sort of almost trying to use the action research as a vehicle to kind of prove what I thought the issue was, and I was sort of trying to force the research a little bit. So I was sort of wanting to be in control of it and not wanting to let go of the reins at all, really. So that was my sort of first experience and initial experiences of action research. Next slide, please. And my team, they were skeptical as well. As we all know, FE is an extremely busy educational environment to work in. It still is COVID times, so people almost have a ceiling, don't they, of what they can sort of put up with in terms of what you're giving them. And I think for my staff initially, the project was a bit like the straw that broke the camel's back, and they just were like, come on, Claire, this is not what we need at the moment. And then next slide, please. To top it all, sort of in the January, we went into a national lockdown. So even I began to sort of feel that I was, you know, getting to the stage where the project was almost, I was thinking, oh, how can I deal with it now? What can I do? But I'm sure, you know, like some of you are this year, you do overcome these barriers and you do keep going. Next slide, please. So as the project evolved, I realised that I don't have to be in control of it, that there isn't a right answer in terms of action research, and the best action research evolves naturally. As I let go of the reins and as I started to allow the action research to evolve naturally, it became apparent that the action research was doing its own job and doing what it needed to do in terms of moving the project forward and actually answering those initial questions. I became a lot more interested in the project because actually it was nothing to do with me. It was sort of evolving on its own. The learners were taking control, the staff members were taking control. And actually that became more interesting to me because it was something new, because that original thing that I was attracted to, not the money, the other bit, the fresh challenge, I was really getting that out of the project. I was becoming a lot more passionate about what I was talking about. I was motivating and enabling staff and students to actually get involved. A bit of background, just because we are trying to answer this question, what's the difference between good practice and action research? All the staff on my team are either good or outstanding. So that was kind of there anyway, the good teaching and learning. But I think we still had got that low level of attainment. So I think you can have good teaching, but without the sort of evaluative processes that Jean was talking about, you may not get the results that you're after. Because my staff, they can all teach a good or outstanding lesson, and they definitely are of that calibre. But why were we not getting the results we needed? And I think this control thing, if you are good or outstanding in terms of your teaching practice, you can sometimes not rest on your laurels as such, but you can be almost frightened of asking more questions because you don't want to rock the boat and change it and go backwards. So I think there was a little bit of an element of that with me. It's like, oh, we're doing all these things right, so I don't want to change too many things, and that's why I kept a bit of a control on it. But as I let go, the quality of the practice didn't change, but we actually developed as a team, and we're able to give these learners even more. So if we can just go on to the next slide, thank you. So in terms of looking at this, is there a difference between action research and good teaching? I think what I found unique about the action research was your focus is intensified. Time is of the essence, isn't it? It always comes down to time, but I think you were almost, I don't want to use this word, but I was almost forced to give this time. I had to, it's part of the project. And I think sometimes your evaluation, your moving of your own practice forward becomes the last thing that you give time to, simply because there are so many pressures on us as we teach or manage or whatever we're doing in our setting. And I don't think we give enough time to learn a voice. The fact that I was able to devote hours and hours and hours of my time to talk with learners, and I'd got really preconceived ideas of what it was that was stopping them passing their level 1 functional maths. You know, I just thought they didn't like maths, they couldn't do maths, various other things. But actually, as I unpicked it, there was so many more things going on with these learners, and I had the time to analyse that. And I think the energy that was built up around the project, you wouldn't get that in a normal lesson, no matter how outstanding the lesson is. Your energy is only in that lesson, whereas this was a whole energy around this process that was going on. Somebody's just put, can you be outstanding if you don't evaluate? I think I probably kind of, you know, you would evaluate lessons on a regular basis, but I think you possibly wouldn't be making such dramatic changes as you would be doing while you're doing the action research. I think to completely change the whole way of doing something, you wouldn't necessarily have time to go into this much detail, to spend this much time with the learners, questioning them. Realistically, you know, I wouldn't have that kind of time, hours and hours and hours to go on to that. And I think this energy that was in the project was transferred to the learners, and they often were talking about the project in lessons. So they would say, oh, are you doing the project? Have you been doing the methods that's happening in the project? So they became really interested in the project and what it was. And it almost became a sort of bit of me background music there. It almost became
yeah, good. I'm just trying to get my head. Have you seen Tina's?
Oh, sorry. We'll have the next slide, please. So in terms of what the project did for us, all the staff became engaged and motivated. Obviously, there was that was a process that didn't happen overnight. The results for those learners in the project cohort was a 66% pass rate versus a 23% pass rate, which was, it's the overall college pass rate, but I think it was the same as the national for EdXL as well for functional skills. There was a whole raft of positive learner comments and also staff comments. If you read the actual report, I'm sure somebody might pop the report into chat somehow, somebody clever. Yeah, there was loads of comments around their actual confidence. One of the learners, we were actually thinking of using tolerance and their mental health to actually exempt them from GCSE. And they said that they were going to, I can't remember their exact words, give it a go or give it a bash or something. It was in learner terms, it was really positive though, and they're actually studying GCSE now, and they never thought that was going to be something that they could do. We also had quite a lot of key learning points, and they're on the next slide. So true learner voice, I think sometimes we can manipulate learner voice. We can send out questionnaires with the questions that we really want to get the answer to, but we're almost shoehorning the answer in, I think, sometimes. Whereas this project gave us time to really be sensitive to learner voice, to sit down with the learners and find out what they needed. It gave us time to meet and discuss practice with colleagues and have true collaboration. I'm the manager of the other teachers involved in the project, and I think I needed to put a different hat on, not just for myself, but for them as well. And if I was in their lessons, I wasn't going in as a manager. I was going in to collaborate with them and to share the project with them. And once they realised that, that was great. I actually started off by teaching their classes and showing them the strategies that we were using. The other thing that we learned is it's important to give everyone ownership, which kind of links into the previous comment. Enabling, facilitating are words that spring to mind, and almost coaching as well. It gave time for deep thinking and reflection, and I think that is the critical thing. Time is the thing that we don't always have to be able to do this deep thinking and reflection. I think I probably, if I'm honest, do my evaluation of any teaching on the way home in the car, because that's the time when you get a break from it all. It's taught us all to be a little bit more open to new ideas, and we've really sort of relished this peer-to-peer delivery, the team teaching element of it. So if we can have the next slide, Claire. I think the next slide is just some sort of learning that was written down in the project. So I'll let you have a read of that one.
Claire, I'm conscious there's a couple of people with sight impairments in the room today. Would you
like me to read that one out?
That would be wonderful, thanks.
So, the strategies and mechanisms were successful because they came from the learners. The project lead and the teachers involved acted as facilitators to enable the learners to recognise what they found difficult and what would help them. As they were so heavily involved, this had the greatest benefit. Teachers as professionals naturally want to teach, but in this process, the teacher needs to facilitate, coach and enable. Teachers involved in the project not only utilised the strategies, but in some cases further developed them in collaboration with learners. And then there's just one more slide I'll read out. The project was a success because those taking part were able to be sensitive to learner voice, and there was a real emphasis on digging deep to discover what the learners needed rather than having a preconceived recipe for success. Our aim was to discover where the barriers to answering functional skills maths questions, and to develop strategies to overcome those barriers. We've not only found ways of doing this, but have also given the learners increased confidence and resilience when tackling functional skills questions. So that's my, I think that's my final slide. Yeah, so any questions? I think we've only got about a minute left.
There is a question, Claire, and I'm conscious you might not have been able to scroll through chat. There's lots of comments, lots and lots of people commenting on what you're saying. But the question was, if I just go back, Maria, do you want to ask it yourself, or would you like me to read?
Yeah, I was just really interested in you saying about the questionnaires, and I really agree with that, that you sort of, you write the questions that you sort of feel you almost know the answer to, but you were saying that you got students into groups, Claire, and that you spoke to them to get their ideas sort of face to face. How did you then sort of collate that information? Because I guess all the time you need sort of evidence, don't you? How did you?
Yeah, I mean, it was all really on pieces of paper. It wasn't a very technical system. I printed a questionnaire off and asked it to various waves. I had first wave of students, second wave, third wave. So each wave, I just asked them the same questions. They were quite simple. How do you feel about maths? What happened at school? Which bits do you get wrong? Why do you think you get them wrong? How can you improve them? What can we do to help? What can you do to help? Anything else they wanted to say? So they were very basic questions, just handwritten. that I kept in my little OTLA book that I had at the side of my computer all of last year, and they were just folded up in there. So nothing technical here, I'm afraid.
No. It was just that was exactly what I wanted to know. That you were just sort of noting down as they were saying, basically. Yeah. Okay.
And my little book I took to every session that I had with the students, and my mentor will know about my little book, but it actually became 2 little books. So anything my mentor said got written in it, and also anything a student said that was interesting. So all the way through their sessions, I was just writing all the time. Anything interesting that they said. So some of that went in the report at the end as well. And I think those little books were really valuable to me to write my report.
Thank you.
There's a really important lesson there about recording as you go along. And I wonder, Jean, if you have any reflections on what Claire said and the ways in which you can systematically record things that have come up in your research. Don't forget to unmute, Jean.
Thanks, thank you, sorry. I think it is one of the most important pieces of advice to give anyone. It's one of the most careless things I do in my own work, because I have books, very well-meaning, and I write down things, and I'm quite good at writing out shopping lists and things like that and crossing them off, and writing out to-do lists. I'm very good at that. The day then takes over and your thinking takes over. And it's very difficult, as we're just saying here, to keep track of your thinking because it moves so fast. How do you go back and think what you thought then when you're thinking something now? So if you can keep that kind of reflective journal or memory book or whatever you care to call it, if you can do it, it's wonderful because you can actually trace your own progress. If you can't do it, don't worry, because your new thinking is going to be more refined than your old thinking was. And you come to the point where you think, how on earth did I manage to think what I thought then when I know what I'm thinking now? One of the joys of that is to say, yeah, but this process is going to continue. As long as I have my health, my mental faculties, as long as I'm alive, my thinking is going to change all the time. So when I get to 110, I'll be able to look back and see where I came from. It's much easier to keep a diary, keep a record of what we do physically than what we do mentally. So the idea of keeping a memory diary, reflective diary, whatever we call it, is just wonderful. That journal where you have on one side what I did or what I think, and on the other side, in what way can I say that that is better? So you have multiple layers of thinking and reflecting and evaluation and rethinking and so on. It's a wonderful experience, a bit overwhelming at times, but it's worth it. So let's stick with it. Lovely presentation. Sorry, thanks.
Yeah, I was just going to say what you said. It was an honest and inspiring presentation, and I jotted down the importance of working in partnership with learners and constantly asking them to help us with our thinking. Claire, we really appreciate you coming back from OTLA 7 to share your experiences with us. Thank you so much. And Jean, for your words of advice and guidance, and for helping us to see those intimate connections between good teaching and action research.